so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. Please start off by sharing for our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in space.
No, for sure. So my name is Rayon Harris. I am 25 years old. I am an aeronautical engineer, and I have always been interested in space and aviation my entire life. And really, just to kind of get things started, it really started since, I would say since I was born. Between my brother and myself, there's two of us who are also in the same industry, same company, doing slightly different things, but really awesome. Our father has done a really great job of, keeping us around all things airplanes and aviation. That's a passion that he always shared for himself. And though he never had the resources to go to school and everything like that on his end, something that he's always done is like he told himself is that maybe he can provide us opportunities, and not necessarily opportunities for us to say, hey, you guys need to go to school and to do this stuff. But if I can expose them to certain things that I really enjoy, and if they enjoy it too, let's see what happens from there. So little things, whether it be, visiting, various different, air shows, or, going to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, or, the fact that he works for American Airlines till this day. That kind of some of those things really kept us around, all things air vehicles, things that are either in the air or going into space. And of course, one of the most interesting things about it is, of course, living in South and Central Florida, the sheer convenience of being so close to the space coast. There are men and women who are going into space, who are living in space for, weeks and months at a time, and they're all being launched, right in your backyard. So it's super awesome to say, like, you're coming home from school, 11 years old, outside of your school bus, and you see this little yellow dot just moving in the air, and like you don't have a cell phone yet, but you just know that that was a rocket launch that was successfully launched in the sky. So
Right.
that was really awesome. So things like that really always, gave me the passion to know that, hey, aerospace is definitely something that would be of interest of mine growing up.
So you went to UCF. Did I read that correctly? So my
That's right.
son just joined UCF for an aerospace engineering. So I'm really excited about that. What were some of your experiences there that really helped to solidify your choice to go into aerospace?
Oh man, I can go on forever with this. So I will say, probably the for one, UCF is a tremendous school for all things aerospace engineering. Not necessarily just because of the classes, but the sheer student involvement. I personally can't find a team of more passionate students at a university than I've personally experienced at UCF. Of course, I have a little bias there, but I
Right.
remember my senior year of high school, going into my senior year, my brother you're going to kind of hear his name a lot. He's 2 years elder of me, also aerospace degree. He came home one day and showed me this little RC hovercraft thing that he made. And he's like, hey, Ray, look at this. Look what I made. And I'm looking at him like, you didn't make that. You bought that. He's like, no, I made that. I was like, no, there's no way. Like, how could you possibly have learned how to do that? And he said, yeah, man, there's this club called AIAA. And it's a club, literally, like their mission is to transform you from a student into an engineer. And I'm just like, wow, that sounds awesome. Because, and we're talking about how so many times, you do the mathematics, the physics, and the science, and how cool is, like, it's interesting depending on, the class and the lesson plan in the classroom. But everybody knows the most fun that you have is when you can actually apply those skills, those mathematics, and physics and science skills into an actual hands-on project that you can, tangibly feel or tangibly see on a computer or something. And so that was awesome. I'm like, wow, you're actually able to use your skills to apply that there. And then I was like, okay, you have my interest. And freshman year of college started, and probably the second or third week of school, they had their first general body meeting. I was a freshman. My brother's like, hey Ray, here, meet up here, get some free pizza. You're in college, you're broke, you don't know what you're eating for dinner yet. Come get some pizza and get some Pepsi, and come
Right.
see what we have to offer at AWCF. And so that first meeting was really, the start. For one, it was my favorite thing about it is two things I really love about AIAA or just aerospace in general is, you know, obviously the projects and the people. Like, you walk into that room and it's full of, for the first time in my life, I'm in a room full of 150 people who also share the same passion and interest as me. And once you kind of, like, cross that check mark, everything else is going on from there. Like, I have friendships who I'm still great friends with today that I met, 7 years ago, you know, my freshman
Well,
year in college at AWCF.
right. So all the cheetahs found each other. Now the cheetahs can run fast together.
That's
So
right.
Well,
That
and
is
it
right.
inspires you, I think, too. Like, I think back, like, if I were to join something like that, I might go, oh, it might be a little intimidated at first. But in reality, hanging with people who are at different levels of that same passion help you to increase. You can be as smart as they are. So if they're intimidated, they should just give it a shot anyway, I would
in,
think.
in fact, if we fast forward, I think 2, maybe 3 years from your story, when I met you, weren't you president of your AIAA chapter at UCF? Am I right in remembering that?
That's right. That's right. My story is probably with AWCF was kind of interesting. When you met me, that was, I believe, the week after I actually won the election to become president of the AWCF chapter. And that was one of those things where my freshman year, I never was like, I want to be president. I want to have this leadership position. I didn't care about all that stuff. I just want to make rockets. I want to make airplanes. I want to make little RC hovercraft. And I just enjoyed it so much. I had so much fun. And I think the leaders at the time, they kind of saw that, someone who's a freshman who's really having fun, who's really cares about the future of his organization, because not only for his experience, but also experience for those around him and those that would kind of follow him afterwards. And so they kind of like always kept an eye on me. And as I increased my skills, like my network, my exposure, and really learn more about not just the individual projects, but how the organization works as a whole, I really found myself in a position where, if anybody at UCF can speak on behalf of AWUCF, I'd rather it be me, the good, the bad, the ugly. I would love to be the person that can represent, answer all questions, defend this organization, to the death of me almost. And it's really crazy to see, like, it's kind of also two-sided too. I feel like I've been able to do so much with my colleagues in college, but at the same time, that is an organization and overall the aerospace community, they always give back. You always get what you put in. That's
Well,
probably my favorite thing about this industry.
It's clear that one of the reasons you were elected was your passion. It's obvious just watching and listening to you. You're super engaging about that. With regards to the AIAA at UCF, in addition to kind of joining the organization, were they able to provide along the way any kind of like internships or guidance that also assisted you in the process?
So it's kind of funny. There were other organizations that did a better job of, like, providing you, the exposure and networking for the internships and jobs. But it's funny, at AWCF, everything was kind of like it was kind of like on autopilot. Where like, hey, if we just we just make these rockets, we make these airplanes. It was never actually said, but it was weird that you just knew that, like, the companies will come to you, they will find you. You never have to go looking for anything.
Right.
Like,
I'm
you don't
thinking
have
about it
to.
like a resume builder instead. Like, oh, we did this.
Exactly.
Sort of like the kid that gets an MBA from Stanford or Harvard, or they're not really hurting for job opportunities, right?
No, exactly.
So
Exactly.
your AIAA experience at college was basically learning skills and preparing yourself for the workforce. That's really
That's right.
great. So let's fast forward. You graduated. What happened upon graduation?
So upon graduation, I will say, before, I would say things didn't necessarily start upon graduation. I would say it started, let's say, that summer beforehand. So the summer beforehand, I was in a position where, one of my best friends, we literally just finished off the year of running the organization, and he was graduating with his aerospace degree, and he was very busy. He had a lot of different things that he had to really take care of, that he really couldn't focus on, applying for jobs yet. So he kind of just wanted to, just really to take a breather here. And I was like, hey, Arthur, um, there's this conference that AAA is having in Atlanta. We should definitely go. And for me at the time, I already had my internship with Lockheed Martin, which is about 30 minutes from campus. Lockheed is UCF is a huge, it's a huge ground for where Lockheed likes to recruit their talent for not only internships but also full time in the Central Florida area. And so I know personally, I was content with where I was at the time. I wasn't really looking for anything yet, still a year before graduation. And so I convinced him, and he was like, all right, let's do it. He was like, all right, I'm just going to buy a one-way ticket. Let's see what happens. And so he trusted me and said, hey, we can help you. Cause I was trying to tell him, I was like, hey, trust me, we're not going to go over here trying to network yourself. Like, you have the skills, you have the experience. Like, I know there is a company that would want you. So went up to Atlanta, went to the conference, is really, having fun. And I ran to a couple of AAA folks, one of them by the name of Mary Scott. And she started hearing a lot about not necessarily just me, but also just overall some of the things that we've been able to accomplish at AWCF. One of them was my freshman year, we had 150 students in the organization. By the time I was president, we were able to grow the club into be more than just an aerospace, more than just, a tight knit club. And we had over 450 members. So we were running that thing like a small business almost in its own weird way with various different programs and projects. And it was a lot of fun at the same time. And she heard a lot about it and she really wanted to, hear my story and, wanted me to actually speak at a dinner to see like, hey, what are some ways we can kind of get what's the successes of, UCF's AIAA into all different colleges and also kind of help with the pipeline of overall just STEM growth in STEM and or just growth and interest in aerospace. And at that dinner, I actually was very fortunate to, be sitting next to the new vice president of Skunkworks by the name of Jeff Babione. And at that dinner, I was able to, also speak on my passion and speak on ways that we can benefit aerospace for 10, 15, 20 years to come. And I talked about kind of like a trickle up effect, where a trickle down effect, where, if the professionals can really focus on, some of the colleges and organizations, we can then kind of take that and kind of start applying those to, some of the high schoolers who can apply that further down. So it kind of also stems because of course, it's really great to see someone who, is, an experienced professional who is talking to you about their experiences. But at the same time, if you're 20 years old in college, you're 21, or if you're a senior in high school, there's such a huge gap in experience between where you are and they are. You don't really understand, though their life could have been very similar to yours, you will never really understand that because they're just so much further in their career than you are. You're still a senior in high school. Whereas you see someone who might be, 21, 22 in college, they might be a couple years older than you, but chances are they might look the same age as you.
Right.
Some of these colleges, they look very young and you guys can still relate. And so it's super easier to not only understand them, but you can see yourself in their shoes because it's so sooner. They can just say, oh, you just do this, do that, and boom, just like that, you're already here.
It's because you can start to identify yourself doing what they're doing when you see yourself in that person, right? The idea that, you can't equate with somebody who's 50 years old in the same way that you can, like, oh, this guy graduated before me 3 years ago.
That's right.
Rayon, do you happen to know Chelsea Partridge, who works at Lockheed?
So Chelsea Partridge, I'm not actually familiar with that name, but she sounds like someone that I should be knowing.
She is at Lockheed. She's a manager now with the Orion safety, some component of the Orion capsule. I met her, I learned of her when she was in college, much like you. And she's that kid that would come and sit down on the floor with my students, or even with like the young classes, like second graders, and read books to them and talk to them about engineering. And when I started at this school in South Florida, she would come, just as you said, and she would cater her content for her age, the age group. And she was a very effective, I think, agent to advertise and really get the kids excited. So I totally get that. And obviously, I remember us going around. It seems like you and I had some meetings together, and I thought it was a lot of fun, right? When we were doing the advocacy, as Shauna said, when you have enthusiasm, that's like 50% of winning someone over. Is just be enthusiastic yourself. So I applaud you on that. Am I right? You're an aerospace engineer. Did you? Some folks probably in your section, the AIAA at UCF, they're probably mechanical or electrical engineers also. Would you agree?
Yes. So that is one thing about AIAA, UCF is once you realize that anything, a spaceship isn't just aerospace engineers. You have mechanical, you have manufacturing, you have electrical, computer, and so we kind of try to form our club the same way, saying, hey, this is not just aero majors only. But I personally myself did graduate with an aerospace degree.
What was your happy place? You mentioned rockets, airplanes. Are you an engines guy? Are you? Is there a subsystem that was your happy place when you were in college? Or do you like to build rocket motors or rocket engines? Or where did you find that you enjoyed spending most of your time as an undergraduate?
So my happy place, which is also part of the reason why I love what I currently do so much, is my happy place, whether it be an air vehicle, an airplane, or a rocket itself, was more so on like I would say on the formula, more on the conceptual / preliminary design of things, right? You're drawing on a piece of paper. You're like, okay, you have this. Let's make a 3D model of it now. Now that we have this here, how can we make this and design this in a way that this can, meet all the challenges and requirements that are presented in front of you? And how do you find the way to be as creative as possible and also use your various problem solving skills to, do all these things that can meet that footprint that is being required of it. And so that's pretty much where I really love. So it's more of like a high level, the entire vehicle itself. So there are some subsystems, some components I really enjoy doing. I mean, for me, anything that I know helps an air vehicle, I'm happy with. I'm happy with knowing it. If it's literally, I'm spending a couple of days, figuring out what kind of fasteners I need to put with this, or I'm spending another couple of days knowing, what's the thermal, what's the various thermal cycle that's going to be applied for this section of it. Like, I'm happy with it. Like, that's one thing that at work they've also learned is that, I'm kind of a jack of all trades here. They just throw me anywhere. And, though I would say overall my title, I am a designer. It's very that word itself is it's very widespread on what you can do as a designer. You do some of the more technical stuff, but some of the more non-technical stuff of like, organizing, what do we prioritize first? We only have X amount of, individuals here who can do all these things right now. What do we focus on this week? And how do we divide up the teams? And what do you think about this? Should we take on this challenge first? How do we put out 10 fires all at one time with only one fire hose?
So limited creativity. It's unlimited creativity, but with very specific constraints.
That's
because
right.
That's really high speed engineering there.
I want to go back to sitting at that table where you're sitting next to a very important person from Skunkworks. For our listeners who, again, they might know a little bit about CubeSats, but they might not know everything that there is about Skunkworks. Can you kind of tell them a little bit about how that's a little different from just Lockheed Martin or what they do?
Yes, of course. So Skunkworks, the best way to really put it, to describe it, is Skunkworks itself is kind of like Lockheed Martin's own internal research and development team, right? So if you look at Lockheed Martin company as a whole, their job is to, create, the various different air vehicles or various different systems for the various customers in production. Whereas Skunkworks, that's kind of like their child where they're like, okay, we're going to put you in the corner here. We're going to give you all the resources that you need. And we're going to give you the most creative people we can possibly find. And also some challenges that we don't know if we can actually do it. But if there's anybody that can do it, it's you and your team. And the teams tend to be very small. Let's say, whereas Lockheed Martin as a whole has over 100,000 employees, Skunkworks tends to have these, these different satellites of, maybe less than, it's definitely like in the ones of thousands, like less than 10% of Lockheed employees are working for these Skunkworks. And Skunkworks pretty much works on challenges that need to be addressed, within the next 5 to 10 years or even 20 years into the future. So to give a good example of some of the most advanced aircraft that's ever been created were made by Skunkworks employees 50 years ago. To this day, technically the fastest aircraft that's ever traveled, the SR-71, that was developed by a very small team of skunks some 50 plus years ago. And so us looking at today, you're like, man, that's modern technology. But once you're on the other side of Skunkworks, you realize like, hey, this is out of date. There's some other great things that we're working on right now, but maybe one day people will see it, maybe one day we won't. It all kind of depends on the customer. What are some things that the demand for.
Yes.
So you're kind of playing. Your job is to play and conceptualize the future.
Right.
That's pretty fantastic.
I want to share with our listeners. In the olden days, long ago, there were companies like Bell Laboratories, and they or companies would devote serious resources to fundamental research. Maybe not research that would impact revenue immediately, but like the over the horizon blue sky stuff. And you're describing Skunkworks, and I think it's fair to say you're like the Bell Labs, right? You're like Bell Labs used to be, where you are doing blue sky projects. You're looking at longer projects that need years to develop that will impact revenue way down the road, but futuristic and disruptive. I would use those words as well, right?
That is a perfect example. And one of the fortunate things, as a good example of one of those that you mentioned, futuristic and disruptive, it's something that's unclassified. So the NASA's X-59 here is a perfect example. So that is it's called a low boom quiet supersonic aircraft, which its job is to be able to fly supersonic speeds above land, which as of right now, the FAA does not allow because of the noise, and it's can, be very annoying for the crowds below. And so NASA said, hey, maybe we can do this, but we actually need a company. We need a team of people who can actually, make this happen. We did the science. We think it's possible, but now we need to pass on our research and investigations to a team that can actually make this vehicle. And they looked no further than Lockheed Skunkworks and said, hey, Lockheed, can you guys make this for us? Like, can your team make this for us in Southern California and actually see if we can actually see it through? And so that's one of the perfect examples. So that's a vehicle that should be having its first flight, either whether it be next year or a year after, but is all coming together. You can check out, NASA Aeronautics, website or this Twitter feed, social media feed to see all the pictures, not only of the final, renders of what it's going to look like, but also some of the progress of how it's being assembled and built. And that is a good example of a sneak peek of kind of like the ways that, Lockheed engineers are really, accomplishing all the tasks at hand, solving some of these challenges. And because, good example, before X-59, for example, the Concorde, that was a very popular,
Yes.
supersonic vehicle that was used commercially. And it was very limited in the fact that it can only fly supersonic over water because of some of the regulations that were made. And so with this X-59 success, if it can show that it can be a little bit quieter when it's flying over land, which they actually plan on doing missions where it's flying over land and the people on the ground won't know. So if they don't recognize it, then they know that's a success criteria right there. If people on the ground are walking their dog and don't realize that a plane flew supersonic above you, NASA and FAA, they're going to be like, okay, I think we're on to something here.
Awesome. Let's talk about education and what you see as the future. We are always interested in how do we get more kids into the STEM pipeline? How do we keep the pipeline from leaking? How do we get more diverse kids into the pipeline? I think our nation's prosperity, say what you will, we've only been preeminent because we've had some of the most, the freedom and the environment for a lot of immigrants to come here and start companies that have gone on and done ridiculous things, right? So from you're a young professional, a very high speed, low drag young professional. What do you see as the future for how we can impact education, put more kids in the STEM pipeline, keep it from leaking, and get more diverse kids in the pipeline?
No, for sure. So I would say probably this is definitely something that can be very challenging, but there's actually I would think it's a relatively simple solution, and it kind of goes back to something that I mentioned a few years ago of that trickle down effect. Definitely our best resources that we can use for getting people to have that passion and getting these young kids in K through 12 is, using these universities and colleges, that are already full of these, 18 to 21-year-olds who are also passionate, and, let them use their experience and their skills to, teach that to, the younger generations. And because it's a lot easier. If we were to put set, ages and experience, on let's say like steps, someone who is, in college, they don't have to go that many steps down to, pick somebody up, whereas someone who is, already like high up in their career, they might be in their 50s or something like that. It'll be a lot harder for them to be connected to someone who is younger. And then at the end of the day, time is of the essence, right? When you're, really into your career already, you're really established, it's very hard to find the hours in a day to really go back and really pay attention to these K through 12 schools and universities. Whereas colleges, man, these colleges, especially the ones with, the STEM, aerospace, mechanical, computer science, they're all spread out in a really great way throughout the country to where you're able to get that exposure to, your local schools, your local challenges. And so it's really, I definitely think college and universities are a really great way to kind of get that exposure, but also at the same time of, to also inspire students is at the same time is to make sure that, companies and organizations, they are highlighting that, these industries are also full of young people and people of very diverse backgrounds. A good example of that is, I will say before I got to college, I thought that an engineer was someone who was in their 30s or 40s. That's what I saw in the movies, who, wear a white collar shirt with a button down. And I know that could have been the case, years ago, but this is, 2014, not that long ago. And I was still thinking that, but I know for me personally, I didn't care because I was a self-starter. But something that we need to understand is that not everyone is going to be a self-starter. Some people, have that interest there, but they just need somebody to kind of give them that small spark to kind of get over that hump. Because everyone isn't, in the same situation to where they have the ability to just make that choice and push through. So
Yeah.
not everybody's not. It's not a level playing field. Some people have to overcome a lot more than others do. And so for those who may feel like they may be in a situation where it's easier for them to kind of get over that hump, or they're over their hump, by all means, look around you. We're all on the same team here. We all love aerospace. We all
Right,
love STEM.
right.
Let's go ahead, stick your hand out. Let's pick each other up, and
Yeah.
you'll be
Sure.
surprised once you pick them up. You guys can go far together.
Right. If your mom or dad is a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer, you've got somebody that can show you how to get there.
Right.
Sometimes I think we sort of are the folks that are shining a flashlight on the path. You have to take the path, but if somebody will put the light on the path for you and give you some experiences, and at least introduce you to the people doing what you think you want to do, then you can decide, is this something I want to do, and how do I get there?
Well, sometimes you don't even know that path exists until somebody shows it to you, right? And I think that that's true for a lot of high school students, let alone middle school students. They just think that, oh, I'm only going to be one thing, and usually it's something a parent told them they might be good at. But it's because of exposure, right? So like one of the things that, I mention a lot, we go on these trips with kids getting away from their parents and actually seeing other people working in the industry, or going to the universities and figuring out about their, the programs that they have, is instrumental in realizing that this is an option for me. I didn't know existed until this moment, right? It was X years today. It was the day's date that I figured out I could do playing as a job for some amazing company that helps me to not only create future solutions, but that gives me the excitement of doing that today with my hands. It's interesting.
No, indeed. And you just brought up a good point. Maybe somewhat along that topic, but something I just thought about that could be really interesting is, because I'm trying to think of so many people who might have added interest who kind of like stop, is that, for example, they try to make, they call them flight paths for, how to be an engineer, an aerospace engineer. If you're a high school, freshman in college, these are the classes you take. This is what you do here, this, that. But a lot of times people may find themselves in a situation where like, okay, well, I'm a senior now and I didn't do those things. Is it too late now? So they think it's already too late, but what people don't understand is it's never too late, right? So
Sure.
for example, for me, I know for engineering, typically something that's a very common thing is they say by the time if you want to be an engineer, even at UCF, they thought that, okay, by your freshman year, you should be taking your physics 1, calculus 1 or calculus 2, those kind of math classes. And it's funny is that my freshman year, both for me and my brother, we started with college algebra, which
that's what my kid did. He decided, even though he could have gone higher, he said, I know I'm a little weaker in algebra. I'm going to go back. Sure enough, did.
I went to NC State with a lot of engineer buddies. I'm a chemist, biochemist. I don't know of any engineer that graduates in 4 years. I think the really smart ones intern. It takes them about 5.5 years, but they've gotten a job waiting for them when they graduate because they interned, right? No, I think engineering is one of the few fields where while you're in college, you can get real world experience. You can intern. You're basically you're getting a job interview where you get paid to work for a company. So I feel like there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Take as long as you need, go at the pace that you need, but don't stop, moving forward on it.
No, for sure. And then quickly, I want to go back to your son who same situation. And
Yes.
That was the exact same situation as me. I had exposure to your calculuses in high school, but then where I struggled in particular was definitely the algebra part of it. And algebra, it's fundamental for being an engineer. Like how can you be a successful engineer if, your algebra skills, aren't as sharp? And I know for me, that was kind of one of those things where I was super self-conscious. I was like, I really need to work on this. And so I remember making that decision my freshman year saying, hey, I'm going to do this, but I know my passion was kind of going to create that path. But I'm trying to think to myself, in a situation for someone who might have been in a situation like that, where they're like, oh, you're in algebra, you shouldn't be taking chemistry right now because you're not there. Or, like, have you thought about other majors? And that's something that's, it's not said on paper, but it's kind of some of the conversations that you hear from other people. And like, because that's also a trend. Most people, started engineering, they realize that, hey, they might not be as far as some of their colleagues around them because they think that they need to graduate in 4 years and this one set plan, and they just kind of like give up. Be like, all right, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So a question for you two, this is something that's kind of interesting is I wonder if you can find a way to kind of create like I guess you can call it like a flight path that's kind of like it's what's the word for it? It's constantly moving, right? So let's say if there was like an app or a site where someone can, literally just type in, where they are currently right now. I am a high school senior. I have not had taken any calculuses, and that path can automatically just tell them, hey, this is what you can do. Or I'm a college freshman. My first semester wasn't too well. I have a 2.8 GPA. Is it too late? But the path can still show like, no, it is possible. So
Yeah,
I
kind
mean,
of
if
light
most
up.
people,
It'd be interesting to see how you could almost engineer that to the point where it's like they pick it. It's almost like choose your own adventure stories. Like, here's where I'm
that's
at
right.
now. What? And it's like, here's go this way or this way. And it might,
And I think what I'm hearing is that don't quit because a rigid path is not your path, right? Everybody has
That's
their
right.
own walk, right? And it's okay. And if it takes you 6 years and you become an engineer, you're still an engineer.
And I don't think it means that just because you start at a different level in one subject means that it takes you necessarily 2 more years. It's just a matter of 2 classes.
I'm extrapolating that because I always recommend to the kids that they get internships. I think internships are.
You need to drain up the
I think internships are, learning the theoretical in the classroom is one thing. Knowing how to interact with a real company or, like an employer that you think you want to work for, and just learn the business culture and the professional, the pro forma way that you send emails and communication. And I remember you were well dressed in DC. You don't show up to your boss looking like you're going to the beach with your friends. That kind of.
That's right.
That's just the way business is, and that's okay. And learning all of that. And I often tell kids, I think colleges is about as good as life gets for a lot of us. You have such a freedom to learn and explore, and as you say, meet new people, learn all of these things that you're very passionate about. It's a time to be relished and enjoyed, and maybe not be in such a hurry to get it over with. So,
Yeah, and to quickly add to that, and of course, internships is definitely, if you can't get internships, definitely get that. But for my advice I have for a lot of students is that if they don't get that internship that first summer, that is okay. An internship is definitely can be challenging to get, but something that's very easy is getting involved in an organization, whether it be,
yes.
Your AIAAs, your ASMEs, your SAEs, any sort of organization that can get you those hands-on skills. Because what they may or may not know is that some of those hands-on skills you're doing in these individual clubs, just because, their budgets may be a lot lower and, they're dressed a lot more casual, everyone seems to be younger. Those are the same experiences that you can also get in those internships. And at the same time, that's what's going to build your resume, not only for your internship, but also your full-time job.
Yeah, good advice.
And that really would have been my last question. What advice do you have? So that kind of brings us to the end. We really want to thank you so much. I hope you'll hang out for a second after we're done recording, just for a few more personal questions, actually, for UCF potential people. But beyond that, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
Rayon Harris, it's been a true pleasure. And I've only met you a few times previously, but I am awesome. I'm very proud, and I think it's just awesome. The good work that you're continuing to do. We didn't even highlight all the work you do for the community, but we're going to save that for our next podcast interview. Okay.
No, thank you so much, guys. Thank you guys so much for all that you're doing. And I enjoy it so much. I'm excited to join you next time.
Thank you.